So today we are covering another unsolved case, and the case we're doing today is the Springfield 3. So let's just get straight into it. The Springfield 3 was 47-year-old Sherril Levitt, her daughter, 19-year-old Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall. Now, all three went missing together from Springfield, Missouri, June the 7th, 1992. And it was just hours after the girls' graduation. So in the week running up, the girls were really excited to be graduating high school. They were talking about all the parties they were going to and what they were going to do. And now Stacy was planning on going to university in Missouri, where Suzie was planning on to become a hairdresser like her mum. On June 6th, 1992, the girls' high school was planning on having a lock-in party for their graduation, alcohol-free, where everyone that attended the party was locked in until I think it was 8 a.m. the next morning. During the day of June the 6th, the girls went to their graduation together, and then they went to separate family gatherings after. Then they would all meet back up together with their friend Janelle at her house. So all three of the girls, they planned to attend a bunch of different parties since they just graduated, so everybody was celebrating. They also planned to stay in a hotel about 30 minutes away from where they lived in Branson, but around 10 p.m. that night, the girls decided not to go back to the hotel and that they were just going to stay at Janelle's house because they wanted to stay out and party a bit more, and they didn't think that they would make it to the hotel that night. Now, while all this was happening, Suzie's mum, Sherril, was just having a normal night at home. So once the girls got back to Janelle's house, they realized that they couldn't stay there just because Janelle graduated and there was so many people staying at her house, like family and friends that came to watch her graduate. And they were just all staying there and there was nowhere for the girls to sleep. So Suzie and Stacy decided they would just go stay at Suzie's house for the night, and then they'd call Janelle in the morning, and then they'd go from there about how they were getting to the hotel. And the girls left Janelle's house in different cars to head for Suzie's house. But when Janelle woke up the next morning, she hadn't heard from either of the girls. So Mike, Janelle's boyfriend, picked her up and they drove to Suzie's house.
Stacy McCall and Suzie Streeter came home after a late-night graduation party. By the next morning, both teens and Suzie's mom, Sherril, are gone.
All their cars are there and their purses are there, and it's all very strange.
They noticed that their porch light casing was smashed all over the ground. But anyway, Janelle just assumed that they were still asleep since they'd been up partying till early hours of the morning. So she just kept knocking, but no one answered. But still, Janelle wasn't too worried. So while this was happening, Mike decided to grab a broom and sweep up the glass off the porch. After all this had happened, obviously Janelle had knocked quite a few times. And with still no answer, she just decided to go in and try and wake them up by yelling their names out. But as you could probably imagine, there was no answer still. But as Janelle was walking through the house, everything looked fine. Their beds looked like they'd been slept in. Their jewelry was still in the bathrooms. Their makeup pads that they'd used to take their makeup off when they got home was still there. So Janelle and Mike just stayed at the house for a little bit, thinking that they just ducked out and that they'd be home really soon. But the longer they stayed there, the more they started to begin to think maybe something wasn't right. Sherril and Suzie had a little dog called Cinnamon, and the dog seemed very anxious, like something was wrong. And Janelle kind of picked up on this. Janelle also noticed that both Suzie and Sherril's cigarettes and lighters were on the table. And if you're a smoker, you don't just leave your cigarettes and lighters on the table. Fair enough if one of you forgot them, but for both of them to forget them is a bit unusual. And also it was said that Sherril was a chain smoker, so she would always have a smoke in her hand no matter where she was going. So that makes it even more like, she didn't really forget them. Eventually, Mike and Janelle left thinking that maybe Suzie and Stacy just left without them. And don't forget that back then, mobile phones weren't really a big thing. Everybody didn't have them. So, you know, it wouldn't be unlikely for them to have just left and not to have like called or messaged or anything. As Janelle and Mike were leaving, the house phone rang. So Janelle went back in to answer it, and all that is said is that it was a very disturbing phone call with a male's voice. Other than that, I can't find exactly what was said, but I don't know if Janelle even knows exactly what was said And she just kind of brushed it off as like it must have been just a prank phone call or something like that. Meanwhile, on the same morning, Stacy's mum Janice and her sister Lisa were going to buy a wedding dress for Lisa. So Janice tried to get a hold of Stacy, make sure she was okay and that she had a good night and everything like that. So Janice called Janelle, thinking that that was the last place that she stayed at, so obviously that's where she would be. And Janelle's sister answered the phone and said that no, she actually didn't stay there. She went back with Suzie and stayed at Suzie's house. But because Suzie had recently moved houses and they had a new phone number, Janice didn't know the number. So at 5 p.m. on the 7th of June, 15 hours since the girls had last been seen, Stacy's mum found Suzie's new home number and decided to give it a call. Still no answer. And this is almost 24 hours after, 24 hours since the girls had last been seen. So she was starting to get a bit worried and concerned, so she decided to drive over to Suzie's house and see if they were there. As you can guess, again, there was no answer, and she just knocked a few times. And obviously after them still not answering, she just decided to walk in. She said that it did feel strange just walking in, but she knew that something wasn't right. And when she got inside the house, she noticed a few things that were strange and not quite right. So the clothes that Stacy had on the day before were all folded up neatly on the floor. And when she looked through them, she noticed that her shirt and her underwear were missing. And all the girls' purses were still there. Stacy's, Suzie's, and her mum's, they were all lined up just sitting there. Which if you go out, your purse is like the one thing you take. So Stacey's mum called the police to report her daughter missing. And the police officer on the phone told her to come in the next day with Stacey's dental record. Janice quickly got the graduation photos developed because they were the most recent photos of the girls. Then made missing persons posters for all of the girls and put them up everywhere. With all of this information that the police had, they tried to make up a timeline for the girls. 2 a.m. they left Janelle's. People started making calls to the house and visiting around 8 a.m. Frustrating though, a lot of evidence was possibly lost at the crime scene, with Janelle being in there, Mike sweeping up the glass off the front porch, Janice rummaging through the clothes and things like that, and she also played the girls' voicemails.
Someone hits delete.
Somehow it got erased.
Now there was apparently a very disturbing voicemail on there that she accidentally deleted, but at the time I guess she thought nothing of it, but the police said that could have been the main link to this whole thing. So now that the case was out there in the media and Janice was really pushing the case out, like as you would, it was dubbed the Springfield 3. And police began to receive a lot of phone calls. One of the tips was a call from a neighbour saying their car had been stolen, but the car was later found. So with no decent leads, the investigation kind of come to a halt and seemed to be going nowhere. So the police started looking into the girls' backgrounds, which is like a common act to be looking into the family and what their history was like and things like that. First was Sherril, the mother. She was a single mother who worked a lot, and they found out that she had a son, Bart Streeter, who was 9 years older than Suzie. They looked into Bart a little bit more and they found out that there was a lot of tension between him and his mother, so much that he moved out at 17. Bart said that it was due to his mother always going into relationships with men that were dependent on alcohol, not on purpose obviously, but it just always seemed to be a reoccurring pattern. But then Bart said that he also became dependent on alcohol. Later on, Suzie moved in with Bart in an apartment. But after a fight that they had, which got pretty aggressive with things being broken and thrown, she decided to move back home with her mum. And they pretty much cut Bart out of their life. So obviously, police investigated Bart's whereabouts on the night. But he said that he was at home and he was drinking and he passed out on the couch, and both his neighbour and his girlfriend can confirm this. Not too long after, an ex-boyfriend of Suzie's became to be a person of interest because not too many weeks beforehand, they actually broke up from him vandalising a graveyard.
Turned out there were a lot of things about devil worship, satanic things that she was looking into.
Police discover Suzie had dated a bad boy who'd recently been arrested for being part of a grave robbing gang.
They'd broken into a mausoleum and they took the gold teeth out of some skulls.
Friends say Suzie was so disgusted by the grave robbery, she broke up with him.
And the theory was that they always suspected Suzie being the one that had turned them in and got them charged with the grave robbing.
So police went by to question him about his whereabouts and if he knew anything, and that's when they found some pretty weird stuff. They found skulls and ritual things and just some really weird stuff, like not normal stuff. But anyway, he wasn't home at the time, so they decided to come back the next day. But when they came back the next day, everything was gone. Everything. All the skulls, the posters, everything were gone. Now Michael and Dustin were the two top suspects because you don't just get rid of everything overnight. That's weird. That screams, I did something, you know? Police called Dustin, Suzie's ex-boyfriend, into the station for questioning. Dustin stated that he wished they were dead. And I mean, why would he? And both boys denied having anything to do with their disappearance. Soon another tip came in from a lady who was on her porch between 6:30 and 7 a.m. on June 7th, and she saw
a person looking like Suzie driving the van.
The woman says she saw Suzie the morning she went missing, driving an older model avocado green panel van like this one.
The van was seen 2 miles away from where Sherril Levitt's house was.
The caller also tells police Suzie looks scared, and then adds this terrifying detail, claiming she heard a man yelling at Suzie from the back seat.
She said that she was pretty sure that the driver of the van was Suzie Street. Now, she said she didn't call in earlier because she hadn't heard about the case or something, and she'd only just seen a poster with her face on it and realized that that's who the girl could have been. But the van was also reported by so many different people in so many different areas and in so many different colors. So police searched tons of vans but came up with nothing. So Janice kept pushing and pushing the story in the media, which led to a tip all the way from Florida, which led to another suspect.
Robert Craig Cox, a highly trained Army Ranger, once named Soldier of the Year, now a suspected killer.
Now, the person who made the tip was the brother of 19-year-old Sharon Zellers, who was also a missing girl but was found murdered in 1978. Robert had been in Florida with his family when he came back to the hotel that they were staying in, covered in blood. Not long after that, Sharon's body was found in a sewage facility not far from where Cox was staying. But since it was the 70s, DNA evidence wasn't very good and it wasn't enough to charge someone. So even though he was the main suspect for this case, he was never charged. Anyway, he moved to California and later on he was charged for 2 accounts of abduction and assault. They later found out that he was an underground utility worker, but his previous job was a car mechanic.
Cox worked at the dealership where Stacy's dad worked.
But police think that a planned abduction was not likely because the girls did change where they were going, because they were going to stay at the hotel, then they were going to Janelle's, and then they were going to Suzie's. So obviously it wouldn't be very easy to plan that with them changing last minute sort of thing. But also Robert had an alibi for that night. 3 years later, they interviewed his girlfriend, who was now his ex-girlfriend, again. This time, she had a very different account of what happened that night.
Alibi, claiming she has no idea where Cox was the night the Springfield 3 went missing.
And she withdrew her previous statement, which confirmed his alibi. Now, without that alibi, Robert is at the top of the list. Police visited him in Texas, where he was serving a life sentence, but each time he would give just enough information that would keep them intrigued, but not enough to incriminate himself. 1 year later, Cox was on a TV interview where he was asked about the Springfield 3.
I'll say that. I know that.
That's not a theory.
Yeah, but I know that I just know that they're dead. That's not my theory, I just know that.
Now, they didn't know if he actually had something to do with it or if he was just doing it for attention. In 2000, there was a reporter who became obsessed with the case and thought that she could solve it.
Kathy Baird, a freelance journalist in Springfield.
People starting reporting the tips to Kathy instead of the police, or as well as the police, because she was taking them all seriously. Obviously the police were too, but she was very, very into this case. But most of the tips they were getting around this time were people saying that they knew where the girls were buried. But there was one place that Kathy kept hearing and that kept being mentioned, and she thought it can't be a coincidence that so many people are calling up. And this was the south car park of the Cox Hospital, which has nothing to do with Robert Cox. So in 2007, 15 years after the disappearance, Kathy hired a mechanical engineer to help with the investigation. His name was Rick, and he had a GPR which produced underground images. So Rick and Kathy scanned a part of the car park, and this is what they found.
Graves hidden under concrete.
Yes, sir, right here. Right in here.
He said, I'm getting 2 images over here and 1 over here. And I said, oh. And that's when I told him, I'm working the disappearance of 3 women. And he was kind of like, well, this is exactly what I see when I go over old graves.
Obviously, the only way to know for sure is to dig it all up. But police say it isn't conclusive enough to dig it up because it is a car park. So in 1997, Sherril and Suzie were legally declared dead. But as for Stacy,
I don't have anything that tells me for sure. So until they have found their remains, I have to believe that they're still alive and well.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment down below of what you'd like to see in the future. I'll leave some links down in the description below for some more info on this case and anything that if you want to look up on it more or anything like that. I hope you guys have a good rest of the week, and I will see you next time.